Black single mom blocked from parent meeting until the white mayor heard her story. The rain had been falling in soft, steady sheets all afternoon, the kind of weather that made the streets glisten like black glass and turned the faint glow of the street lamps into blurred halos. Monique Harris adjusted the hood of her worn navy raincoat as she hurried along the cracked sidewalk toward Jefferson Elementary School, one hand gripping the strap of her purse, the other clutching a folded piece of paper with the meeting details printed in bold letters. Her daughter, Kara, had been bubbling with excitement about the upcoming school talent showcase, and this evening's parent meeting was supposed to be where Monique would learn all the ways she could support the event. She had been looking forward to it, not just because she wanted to be involved in her child's world, but because it was rare to be invited to anything at the school that didn't feel perfunctory or obligatory. Over the past year, Monique had noticed subtle things. The way her emails to the PTA often went unanswered, the way her offers to help with class projects were politely brushed aside, and how other parents' names were remembered instantly, while hers seemed to slip through unnoticed. Still, she told herself she was imagining it, that everyone was just busy, that she didn't need to read into things. The school came into view at the end of the block, its brick facade slick with rain, the flagpole out front swaying slightly in the wind. She stepped into the lobby, shaking the droplets from her coat, and followed the muffled hum of voices toward the multipurpose room. A small table had been set up outside the door, where two women, both neatly dressed in tailored jackets and silk scarves, were checking names off a printed list. "Hi, I'm here for the parent meeting," Monique said with a warm smile, offering the folded paper she had brought. The woman with short blonde hair glanced at it briefly before looking down at her list. Her brows knit slightly. "Name? Monique Harris," she replied. There was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough to feel heavy. The woman murmured, scanning the page again. "I'm not seeing you here." "That's strange," Monique said, her voice still polite but edged with confusion. "I got the invitation last week. It has the date, time, and room number. It says all parents are welcome." She unfolded the paper and slid it across the table. The second woman, tall with sleek brown hair, leaned over to look, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This meeting is actually for the planning committee," she said carefully, her tone tinged with the sort of condescension that wears a polite smile. "It's a little more involved than just attending." Monique felt her cheeks grow warm. "I know. That's why I came, to be involved. I'm more than happy to help with whatever needs doing." The blonde woman gave a small shake of her head. "I'm sorry, but this is a closed session. We already have all the parents we need for the committee this year. You can sign up to volunteer at the actual event, though." It was the same pattern she'd seen before, wrapped in the same soft-spoken refusals. She glanced past them, through the open door, where clusters of parents stood chatting over coffee and pastries, their laughter punctuating the low hum of conversation. Several of them she recognized, mothers and fathers she'd seen dropping their children off in the mornings, and she knew, without needing to guess, that not all of them had been pre-approved for this so-called closed session. "May I ask," Monique began slowly, "how these committee members are chosen? Because it doesn't say anything about that in the invitation." The tall woman's polite smile stiffened. "It's just tradition. We keep it to a certain group to make planning more efficient." Monique let out a breath, steadying her voice. "I understand wanting things to run smoothly. But I'm a parent here too, and I'd like the same opportunity to contribute as anyone else, especially when it's for something my daughter is excited about." The blonde woman's tone sharpened, though her words remained calm. "I'm sorry, but the decision's been made. We can't make exceptions." There was an unspoken "for you" hovering in the air between them, a weight Monique felt but could not prove. She stood there for another moment, torn between arguing and walking away, knowing that either choice would be met with the same underlying dismissal. Finally, She folded the invitation and slipped it back into her purse. "All right. Thank you for letting me know," she said quietly, and turned to leave. The rain hit her face as she stepped outside again, its cool sting mixing with the heat of frustration in her chest. She walked down the steps, pulling her hood tighter, wondering how she was going to explain to Kiera that she hadn't been allowed to join the meeting. She didn't notice the man standing under the awning near the side entrance until she was halfway to the parking lot. He was older, in his early 50s perhaps, with silver at his temples and a neatly pressed navy overcoat. His eyes followed her for a moment before he stepped forward, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the rain. "Excuse me," he said. "Were you just turned away from the meeting?" She paused, unsure who he was, but nodded. "Yes. They said it was a closed session." His gaze was steady, thoughtful. "That's interesting, because I'm the mayor of the city, and I was under the impression that meeting was open to all parents." The rain seemed to fade into the background in that moment, replaced by the quiet intensity in his voice and the faint flicker of something that looked like resolve in his eyes. Monique blinked at him, unsure whether she'd heard correctly. "You're the mayor?" she asked, her voice cautious, as if she half expected him to smirk and tell her he was joking. He gave a polite nod, stepping closer so they wouldn't have to raise their voices against the rain. "Thomas Whitaker. I came tonight because I wanted to see how the school engages with parents before the big talent showcase." He glanced toward the front doors where the two women still sat behind the table, chatting with a pair of well-dressed parents who had arrived late but were ushered inside without a second glance. "From where I was standing, it looked like you were excluded." Monique pulled in a slow breath, weighing whether to simply brush it off. After all, what good would it do to complain to someone she'd just met, even if he did hold an office? But there was something in his demeanor, a kind of patient attentiveness, that made her think he actually wanted to hear the truth. "They said it was a closed meeting for a certain group of parents," she replied, her voice low. "That it was tradition to keep it that way. But the invitation I got didn't say anything about that. It just said parents could attend to help plan the event." Mayor Whitaker's brow furrowed slightly. "And they didn't give you any reason beyond that?" "No," Monique said, shaking her head. "And this isn't the first time. I've tried to get involved in different school activities, but it's like there's an invisible wall. I see other parents welcomed in, but for me, there's always some polite excuse." She hesitated, then added, "I thought maybe I was imagining it at first, but tonight made it hard to ignore." He studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly in thought. Invisible walls have a way of being very real for the people who run into them. A group of parents passed by just then, chattering happily as they hurried toward their cars. One of them gave Monique a quick glance, then looked away without a greeting. She felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the quiet kind of hurt that came from not being seen, or worse, being seen and dismissed. Mayor Whitaker gestured toward the awning's drier patch. "If you don't mind, I'd like to hear more about this. I think I've been getting a version of this school's culture that's polished for guests." Monique hesitated. She didn't know this man personally, and politicians had a way of asking for stories they never intended to act on. But the memory of those women at the table, their gentle smiles that still somehow pushed her out, made her decide she had nothing to lose. They stood under the awning as she spoke, telling him about the unanswered PDA emails, the volunteer sign-up sheets that somehow never reached her, the time she had baked 3 dozen cupcakes for a fundraiser only to arrive and find they'd been placed on a side table in the hallway instead of the main refreshment spread. As she spoke, the words came more quickly, the small indignities stringing themselves together into something heavier. Whitaker listened without interruption, his expression shifting between concern and a quiet, simmering disapproval. "Has anyone in the administration addressed this?" he asked finally. She let out a small, humorless laugh. "I tried talking to the principal once." She smiled, told me she was sure it was just a misunderstanding, and said she'd look into it. That was 6 months ago. Nothing changed. The mayor's gaze flicked back toward the school doors. And they call this community engagement, he murmured, almost to himself. Just then, the muffled sound of applause filtered out from inside the multipurpose room. The meeting was clearly wrapping up. Monique saw the two women at the table gathering their things, their faces lit with the satisfaction of an evening gone exactly as planned. Whitaker turned back to Monique. Do you need to get home right away? She shook her head, wary but curious. Not immediately. Why? Because I'd like to go inside and speak with them. And I think it would be useful for you to be there when I do. Her instinct was to refuse. The thought of walking back into that room after being turned away made her stomach tighten. But something in his tone was different from the empty promises she'd heard before. This wasn't a vague, "I'll look into it," or "I'll pass your concerns along." It was a statement of intent. She pulled her hood back and met his eyes. "All right," she said quietly. As they stepped back inside, the rainwater pooling at the edges of her coat dripped onto the tile, each drop marking a return she hadn't planned to make, and one that she sensed might change more than just her place in a single meeting. The air inside the school felt warmer than before, though Monique suspected it wasn't the heating but the heat of the room they were walking toward. A heat made up of low laughter, the smell of coffee, and the faint clink of porcelain cups being stacked away. Mayor Whitaker walked beside her, his stride steady and purposeful, the kind of pace that didn't rush but also didn't leave space for hesitation. As they entered the multipurpose room, several parents were gathered near the tables, chatting in little clusters as they gathered coats and handbags. At the far end, the two women from the sign-in table were speaking with the principal, their faces glowing with post-meeting satisfaction. It took only a few moments for them to notice the mayor. The principal's expression shifted first, that smooth blend of surprise and professional warmth reserved for unexpected VIPs. "Mayor Whitaker," she said brightly, stepping forward with her hand extended. "We didn't know you were attending tonight." "I was," Whitaker replied, shaking her hand firmly, "though not in the way you might think. I wasn't here as a guest of the school. I was here to observe." The principal's smile faltered for half a breath before settling back into place. "Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing how we bring parents into the planning process. We pride ourselves on being a very engaged community." "That's interesting," Whitaker said, his voice even but carrying enough weight that nearby conversations began to quiet. "Because from where I was standing, I saw a parent arrive with a printed invitation and be told she couldn't participate." He stepped slightly to the side so that Monique was fully visible beside him. "This is MS. Monique Harris. She's the mother of one of your students. She came here tonight ready to contribute and was turned away at the door." The principal's eyes flicked to Monique, and there was a brief pause. Not long enough to be rude, but long enough to be telling. "I'm sure there was some misunderstanding," she began. "Our planning sessions are structured in a certain way." Monique felt the familiar knot in her stomach tighten, the one that came from hearing polite explanations that neatly sidestepped accountability. But before she could speak, Whitaker continued. "I've read the invitation she received," he said. "It states that parents are welcome to attend and assist with planning. Nowhere does it mention that there is a pre-selected group. Yet, from what I observed, some parents were allowed to enter freely while others, specifically MS. Harris, were not." The two women from the table shifted uncomfortably. One of them, the tall brunette, finally spoke. "It's nothing personal. We just have to keep things manageable. If we let everyone in, it can get chaotic." Whitaker's gaze was steady, but there was steel beneath it now. "And how do you decide who gets in and who doesn't?" There was silence. The kind of silence that makes everyone suddenly aware of how many people are listening. Monique could feel eyes on her, not all of them friendly, but the mayor didn't flinch. "It seems to me," he went on, "that you've mistaken efficiency for exclusion. They're not the same thing. A public school, funded by public money, does not get to quietly decide which parents are worth hearing from. The principal's hands folded together, her smile now taut. Mayor Whitaker, we truly value all our families. If there was a lapse tonight, I will personally see that it's corrected moving forward. Good, he said, because I'll be back for the next meeting, and I expect a mess. Harris will be seated at the table, not standing outside of it. For a moment, no one moved. Then the mayor turned to Monique. Would you like to walk around the room with me? She hesitated, the urge to shrink away battling with the flicker of courage that had been reignited. Sure, she said finally. They moved together through the clusters of parents, the mayor introducing her by name to people who had never so much as nodded to her before. Some looked awkward, some forced a smile, and a few seemed genuinely warm, as if realizing for the first time that she wasn't a stranger at all. She was simply someone they hadn't chosen to see. By the time they reached the far end of the room, Monique could feel the tension in her shoulders beginning to ease. The invisible wall hadn't fallen yet, but tonight, for the first time, there was a crack in it. What she didn't yet know was that this small confrontation would ripple far beyond a single meeting, and that the mayor's interest in her story was just beginning. The following morning, Monique found herself replaying the scene from the night before while she packed her daughter's lunch. The clink of the lunchbox lid and the quiet hum of the refrigerator were a strange contrast to the echoes of the mayor's voice cutting through that crowded room. She hadn't expected to sleep much, but surprisingly, she had. And when she woke, there was a lightness in her chest, like something had shifted. Still, there was a whisper of doubt that trailed her thoughts. It was easy for someone in power to make a bold statement in the moment, much harder for them to follow through once the public attention moved on. That doubt grew quieter later that morning when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Good morning, MS. Harris. This is Mayor Whitaker. I hope I'm not disturbing you. She stared at the message for a moment, surprised not only by the contact, but by the informality of it. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed back. Monique, not at all. Is everything all right? Mayor Whitaker, I thought about what you shared last night. It concerns me, and not just as a mayor, but as someone who believes communities work best when everyone has a seat at the table. I'd like to meet with you to talk about it further, perhaps over coffee. By the time she set her phone down, her pulse was a little faster. Not from nerves, exactly, but from the realization that he meant to do something more than give a polite nod to her experience. They agreed to meet that afternoon at a small cafe near City Hall. The place was warm and filled with the scent of roasted coffee beans and freshly baked pastries. Whitaker was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table, his suit jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair. Monique, he greeted, standing to shake her hand. I appreciate you making the time. I appreciate you asking, she said, sliding into the chair opposite him. He took a sip of coffee before leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table. I've been thinking about how often things like this happen in small, quiet ways, the kind that are easy to overlook unless you're on the receiving end. What you experienced last night wasn't just rudeness. It's a symptom of something deeper, and I want to understand exactly what's been going on at that school. Monique told him more this time. She spoke about the subtle dismissals, the way emails seemed to vanish into a void when she volunteered, the fundraising committee she'd been told was full despite hearing later that others were invited to join. She didn't dramatize. She didn't have to. The patterns spoke for themselves. Whitaker listened carefully, nodding at certain points, jotting down a few notes on a small pad. I've dealt with larger-scale issues in this city, he said when she finished. But I've learned that the smallest barriers can often reveal the biggest divides. Monique tilted her head. So what happens now? That depends, he said. I could make a few calls, speak with the school board, and insist they address this immediately. But I think it might be more powerful if we bring your voice directly into the conversation. Not just for this school, but as part of a broader initiative. Her brow furrowed. An initiative? He smiled faintly. I've been pushing for a citywide parents' council, a space where every school in the district has representation from families of different backgrounds. No selective invitations. No closed doors. If you're willing, I'd like you to be one of the founding members. She blinked, unsure what to say. She had never thought of herself as someone who could help shape policy. But the memory of those polite, unyielding smiles at the school door was still fresh, and she felt something stir inside her. Not anger this time, but a determination she hadn't realized she'd been carrying all along. I'm willing, she said quietly. Good, Whitaker replied. Because I think your story is going to make a lot of people take a second look at the way they've been doing things. They spoke for another half hour, discussing logistics and potential challenges. By the time they parted, Monique felt a strange mix of apprehension and resolve. This wasn't going to be a quick fix, it was going to be a fight, one she was suddenly ready to take on. That night, as she tucked her daughter into bed, her little girl asked, Mom, were you at the school yesterday? Ms. Carter said she saw you there. Yes, I was, Monique said, smoothing the blanket. Her daughter tilted her head. Did they let you in? Monique hesitated, then smiled softly. Not at first, but next time, yes. And maybe a lot of other moms, too. She turned out the light, the quiet hum of the night carrying her into a new chapter she hadn't seen coming. The city council chamber was buzzing in a way that felt almost theatrical, with murmurs filling the room like a low tide of expectation. Parents, teachers, and administrators had gathered, and in every corner there was the subtle undertone of anticipation that precedes change. Monique arrived early, her posture composed, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed the storm of emotion within. She had rehearsed in her mind the points she wanted to make, but she also knew that words alone would not suffice. She would have to convey truth through presence, through the gravity of her lived experience. Mayor Whitaker arrived shortly after, moving with his usual measured confidence. He offered a reassuring nod as he passed by her, a silent acknowledgement that he understood the weight she carried. The two of them took seats at the front of the chamber, facing the audience of city leaders and families. Whitaker gave a brief introduction, framing the meeting not as a debate, but as a platform for honest conversation. When it was her turn to speak, Monique rose, feeling the room's gaze fix on her with varying intensities, some skeptical, some curious, and some outright hostile. She inhaled deeply, recalling the image of the closed school door that had set this entire journey in motion. I want to talk